Again, just thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for this opportunity to be here at Bethel, Lord. Sometimes we just take that for granted, just have the opportunity to have a good education. So we thank you for that. And I just pray that you would listen well to what Professor Koen has today. You would just be able to apply it to our lives as well. Just pray these things in your name.
Amen. What I'd like for you to do is to get into groups of 2 or 3, and I want you to just debrief a little bit from the movie White Like Me that we watched last week. So I want you to just talk in small groups about 1 or 2 things that came up for you or you thought as we watched that movie. I'll give you roughly about 3 minutes, so about a minute apiece a person. So you can just talk about that briefly. All right. So for the next 3 minutes or so. Thanks.
I did it last time.
Somebody got to do something about it. Yeah, sorry. Son, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually started that. There you go.
All right. So what were some of the things that stood out for you in the film and watching the film, or your thoughts about the film? What were some of the thoughts or some of the things you guys talked about? Yeah.
I didn't realize how many white people hate like vote against Obama.
Oh, you didn't realize how many white people didn't like Obama, President Obama?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
like how they had the rallies. And
Yeah.
you don't want to hear my answer to why they didn't want Obama. That's why it stood out to me.
Yeah. So that stood out for you that there are lots of people who were against President Obama. Okay. Other folks, what kinds of things stood out for you? Yeah.
So in the video they had like during the civil rights movement they were interviewing like people and like they were saying how they thought everyone was treated equally then, and then just like the similarities to like today. But like almost everything they said in the 50s and during the civil rights movement we still say today.
Okay. So folks, some folks thought it was fine, that things were fine, that there didn't need to be a change, and the other folks were having a totally different experience. Other things that you noticed or you thought about?
He was trying to fight for justice in other areas and stuff like that too, but right in his own backyard, things are crazy as hell. It's kind of like when folks leave, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna do this work everywhere else, and then I'll turn around and look right behind the house, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, what you doing? You know? It's really interesting.
Yeah, has anyone ever heard of flying over one mission field to go to another, or using that kind of metaphor that sometimes there are things right at home we can do that we don't, but we're really excited about going someplace else to do work. And why might that be? Why might it be easier or more engaging to go someplace else and do work?
It's obvious that there needs work to be done.
Because it's obvious that there's work to be done, right? So I can see that it's very clear, right? So it may not be so clear when it's really close to me, right? What else?
I think it's easier than the physical. Here, when working on emotions, working on quality, things that aren't tangible or fixed, whereas you're going abroad and you're helping people get fed, you're helping people understand planetary lifestyles.
Yeah. And those things are what? Like, you know, if I build a house or I build a school, I go over and do a mission trip and we build a school. Once I built the school, what? I'm done, right? I did my part, right? Those are, those very tangible things that you're talking about, right? So feeding, food, giving, and it's very finite, because once I've done that, I'm done. But when I'm at home, you have to build relationships. And when are those relationships done? When is that work complete? Right? Yeah. So it can be a very long process. Other folks, what did you notice? What did you think? Yes.
I was just gonna go back to what we were just on.
Yeah.
I think people fear like they're people of their own, like it's more scary to go to a door here and like talk to someone who's the same as you, whereas you go overseas and like people can be more welcoming and it's not as scary. You don't feel like you have anything to lose.
Yeah.
You don't fear judgment.
Yeah. Then what are they going to think about me? Because you make certain assumptions already, right? Like they already think I'm weird, so I may as well just do this thing anyway, right? It was funny. A Jehovah's Witness came to my door, and I don't know what she like picked up from me, but I was very kind to her, and I was very participatory in the conversation. But she did not try to recruit me to Jehovah's Witness, right? She didn't say, come to Kingdom Hall and we're having this meeting, come to, she was like, oh, it was great to talk to you, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what if she had I don't know what was going on, and I probably should have asked, like, why didn't you invite me to whatever? But I think, you know, and I commend her for being able to be one of those people who do that. Like I also see like the Latter-day Saint elders, kind of, anybody ever seen those? White shirts, black badge, usually a black tie, right? Much respect, I give them much love, because they're doing stuff that's like here, like they're doing mission stuff here, which is always interesting. You know, whatever. So other things. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
I can't remember the specific term, but and the person was talking about how when he went onto a plane and he knows that there's like 2 black pilots, and it wasn't like he didn't necessarily like believe like the thought that like first popped into his head, but it was just like something that like in American culture he's been like continually fed, and so that's like natural.
It was like 2 black pilots. Like, can they really fly this thing, right?
Yeah.
And what was his result of that though?
But he then he like counteracted that thought. He's like he knows that like it's not true.
Yeah.
It's what was that? Do you remember like the specific like that
Condition?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So just kind of, I mean, it's that primal brain, right? So that and it's human beings do not have instincts. I just want to put that out there. But it is almost an instinctual response. It's pretty close to being an instinct because it's been conditioned so heavily, right? And so you can have these conditioned responses, just like he did. Other folks, what else did you? Now, I will tell you that he was very nice in the film. He was very, if you ever read any of his stuff or see him in interviews or whatnot, he's not that nice in the videos and the interviews. So, so there's that. So I wanted to kind of unravel some of that stuff today as we lead up to a conversation about how do we start to enact this stuff in schools. So what does this stuff look like in schools? How do we combat all of this stuff in schools? And so there's a bit more theory that I wanted to share with you so that we could actually deal with that. So video theory. So we're gonna do video. I'm gonna show this short video, and I just want you again to just tell me what your thoughts are on what you see on the screen. And this was done a long time ago, and I used this when I first started doing a lot of my diversity training and stuff. So let me know if this still works for our current time. Okay, so so this was made back in I'm gonna say I was using it when I taught high school. So the late 90s. And so tell me if you think it still works today. So take that off. AV off.
Better than women in science? Are certain races smarter? Those are the stereotypes, but now some psychologists say stereotypes can become self-fulfilling prophecies.
What's the ratio here of 2 guys to a 6?
Ever see this ad depicting a ditzy woman trying to get into college? What are your plans for the future?
But when are the homecoming queen elections?
One study showed that women who watched ads like this before taking a math test scored 38% lower than women who didn't see the ad. The Kaplan Education and Test Prep Company helped us run similar tests. And sure enough, on our unscientific test, the women who saw the sexist commercials did worse. Some later told us they found those results hard to believe. It's so powerful that just watching the dumb ad could make a difference.
No, I don't think so.
The women in your group did worse.
The only way for it to work is that you have to internalize it. I guess you don't know what's really affecting you, which is creepy in and of itself.
This stereotype effect has been found in study after study, says NYU psychology professor Joshua Aronson.
We found that just reminding the women that they were college students at a selective college overcame the gender gap. However, when we remind them that they're women, the gap widens.
You tell Asians that, remember, Asians do well in math,
Yes.
their scores go up.
Yes.
Then what does the stereotype that blacks test poorly do to a black person who's about to take a test?
The situation of taking an IQ test for a black kid is so loaded that it's not a direct measure of their intelligence.
He found he could change blacks' test scores simply by saying different things before the test.
Tell people taking that test that this isn't a test at all, it's a puzzle. The black students' scores jump dramatically. Mindset matters.
That was also found in golf experiments. It's demonstrated here, done by Jeff Stone at the University of Arizona.
The test is designed to measure personal factors correlated with natural athletic ability.
First, black and white students are told a miniature golf game tests athletic ability.
Natural athletic ability, natural athletic ability.
After hearing that, blacks perform better. Blacks, after all, have heard plenty about blacks being natural athletes.
I'm confident in my ability, so when I heard it was a test of that, I was like, okay, well, I know I'm gonna score somewhere in the high range to see how high I can go with this.
Oh! But when students were told the golf game is a test of intelligence,
The test is designed to measure personal factors correlated with sports intelligence.
his study found the black scores were 18% worse.
Oh, come on.
Some of this research showing that stereotypes can become self-fulfilling prophecies was inspired by Jane Elliott's surprising experience.
It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this?
Almost 40 years ago, this Iowa school teacher decided she'd show the kids what it was like to live with discrimination. So she divided her classes by eye color. ABC happened to be there to film one of her tests.
I mean, the blue-eyed people are the better people in this room. Oh, yes, they are. This is a fact. Blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people.
She had a so-called inferior brown-eyed group wear these identifying collars. She told them they were lazy and slow, and they'd have shorter recess.
Brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground.
The kids' behavior soon changed. Brown-eyed kids were miserable. The next day, she reversed the role.
Yesterday, I told you that brown-eyed people aren't as good as blue-eyed people. That wasn't true. The truth is that brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people.
Then she gave them a flashcard test.
You want to be kind of point? Yeah.
After the brown-eyed kids had been labeled inferior, it took them 5 minutes to finish the flashcards. But the next day, when they were the superior group, they finished in half the time.
I had no idea that you could change a child's academic performance. It never occurred to me that that would really work. On the day the kids were on the top, their academic performance was better than it had ever been before in my classroom.
You went faster than I've ever had anyone go through the hard path.
When you're told you're superior, you act up to that.
But the children she treated as inferior that day did much worse.
I set them up to fail, and they failed.
4 minutes and 18 seconds. I know we worked in the How long did it take you yesterday?
The inferior group of kids seemed deeply affected by the day's test.
I said, you want to take these collars off? And she said, it wouldn't make any difference. And I said, why, what do you mean? She said, we'll still have these eyes. Honey, it isn't my fault you're stupid.
Today, Elliot does this exercise with older students, again discriminating against half the class based on eye color.
Would you like me to go get my paper and pencil? I wouldn't like you in any way, shape, or form.
They know it's just an exercise, but being treated as inferior still has a powerful effect.
Persecuted her for standing out, persecuted him for standing out. The only change that ever happened was people stand out, and I don't stand out.
The good news, researchers say, is that if students and teachers are just aware of the stereotype effect, they're on their way to overcoming at least part of it.
And if you aren't aware, you'll let it happen. And you'll take that in, and it will become part of your psyche. You don't have to take it in. It's time to kill the stereotypes.
Does the color of eyes that you have make any difference in the kind of person you are?
So have any of you had experiences with any of Jane Elliott's work? Have you You've seen some of those? Raise your hand if you've seen any of Jane Elliott's work. All right, cool. Those of you who have, can you talk a little bit more about where she likes to go in her work from what you've seen? Can you talk a little bit about what, so they gave an introduction to the framework, so what else does she cover in her work? No, I mean, just like what context did you see her work? What class, were you in a class? Was it out in the community? Go ahead.
Right, so I watched it in my high school sociology class.
Okay.
And I especially thought, I mean, obviously the stuff in the classroom is super interesting, but then also on the playground, like off of recess, altercations start breaking out, and like you see, I think it's during the first day, the kids with blue eyes like can't play with the kids with brown eyes, and the brown eyed kids that get upset because like their best friends have blue eyes.
Oh, they did this as an experiment?
Well, it was part of the same experiment.
Wow.
With the college, and so yeah, like all like they hit each other like best friends or worst enemies in a single day.
Yeah.
Which was crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, like going along with that, they also like people who were told that they were better, so like if you guys were better for the day, they would like start to say like nasty things about the other group. And just like,
So did you guys go to the same school?
no.
So different school, and they actually did this with kids?
Oh, not our schools, no.
Oh, okay. So I was like, whoa, like that's some heavy stuff. Oh, but they started saying that. So the film that you watched, the piece that you watched from Jane Elliott's, that's what. Okay, cool. I was like I need to get the anyway. All right, cool. So they started saying bad things. They started fighting, and it didn't just stay in that classroom, right? So the kids really started to take that on as a real thing. Right. Other folks, what were your experiences with, or what was the context by which you saw Jane Elliott's work? Yes.
I have a question more about,
Yeah.
if anyone who's seen must answer, what is the effect on the kids who aren't either blue or brown, like green, like aren't being brought up, but also aren't being brought down? They're just kind of like in the middle and have to see both sides. Like, what are the effects on those kids?
Yeah. You know what? Anybody have an answer for that has seen the work? Because I don't think she's ever dealt with that.
I think it was just split into blue and brown eyes.
Yeah.
I think that green eye would be the blue.
Yeah, it was something like that.
Or they would have to make a choice, I would imagine, that they'd have to choose.
No.
Okay, so first of all, why was she picked? I mean, what was the point of Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes? Was it really about eyes? No, what was she? What do you think she was trying to demonstrate, other than just being a nasty woman? She's the first nasty woman. Get it? What was the point about Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes? What's that?
Self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah, this idea of self-fulfilling prophecies is part of what she was trying to do. And what did you notice? So she was a teacher in Iowa. And so what did you notice about her class? It was all white. So if she's going to try to talk about some of these things, how does she do that? And she chose the eye color as a way to make those differentiations, right? And what about eye color might be a great way for her to do that work? You can't change it. You didn't choose it, right? And so when we start talking about other aspects of so-called differences, can't change those either, relatively speaking, right? So, apparently now, you can change a lot of stuff. And then you can want to change it back, which I think is interesting. You guys heard about Caitlyn Jenner wanting to go back to being Bruce?
Really?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's probably been 3-4 months ago that Caitlyn Jenner said that she no longer wants to be Caitlyn and wants to be Bruce. Yeah, so interesting. I'm not sure, but maybe anyway. So one of the things that they talk about is this idea in layman's terms, we would call it a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I'd like for us to use a more clinical definition, which is this idea of the Pygmalion effect, right? And this is huge. This is huge. And the Pygmalion effect is based off of this Greek story of Pygmalion, that Pygmalion find anyone to love, so he created someone to love, and fell in love with the statue, and he made the statue, so he loved it. So it's like this kind of weird little circle kind of thing. And so the Pygmalion effect is this idea that people rise and fall to expectations. Oh, not raise. Or also known as self-fulfilling prophecies, right? So the Pygmalion effect, or self-fulfilling prophecies. People rise and fall to those. And so then the question then becomes, if we're rising and falling to expectations, where do those expectations come from, and who sets the expectations? And so that leads us to kind of this idea of oppression. And oppression is lawful or unlawful use of force to limit access to power. And how do we define power? How do we define power? Power is what? Power. What is power? You guys took 8th grade physical science. What's power? What's that? The ability to do work, right? Power, the ability to do work. And what do we need in our society? What do we need to do work? If I want to get something done, what do I need to have? I need to have money, right? So money. Influence. I need to have access to a job. Services and goods. Right, so resources. So if I have these things, then I have power. But oppression is a lawful and unlawful use of force to limit access to power, which is defined as these things, right? And why is it necessary for me to say lawful and unlawful use of force to limit power? We talked before about kind of 2 types of laws. What are the kind of 2 types of laws that we've talked about in this class? Just and unjust laws, right? So for an example, no, you give me an example of a just or an unjust law. Give me some examples of just and unjust laws.
Just law is if you assault someone, you go to jail.
Okay, if you assault someone, you go to jail. That's a just law. What's an example of an unjust law? Yes.
You, jaywalk and you go to jail.
You jaywalk and you go to jail, right? So the person technically did break the law, but does the punishment necessarily fit that crime? Of all things considered, that there's not other stuff that they have done, or they don't have warrants, or blah, blah, blah. But if I just jaywalk and I go to jail because I did break the law, which was jaywalking, that might be considered an unjust law, right? Powder cocaine versus crack cocaine, right? The way that those got sentenced was not just often, right? I think it's funny, you know, and I mentioned this before. My uncles have spent a lot of time at camp because of their possession of marijuana. What do we know now about marijuana? There's so many states. I mean, if it was in Colorado, they might be heroes by now, right? And so this idea of just and context and all this other stuff, just and unjust laws. Dr. King broke a number of laws. He broke a number of laws. He gathered without a permit. He didn't leave when people told him to leave. Was his, and the funny thing is, in retrospect, we're able to say that it was just and it was righteous, but in that time, he was a troublemaker, right? So this idea of oppression is the use of lawful and unlawful force to limit access to power. All right. So the Pygmalion effect is the self-fulfilling prophecy, and oppression is this. And so one of the ways that oppression works is that it has the power of definition. It creates the power of definition, and I can't tell you necessarily if it's a. And this is always a bad metaphor because we know what happened first, but this idea of chicken or egg, right? So which comes first? Is it oppression that comes first, and then the power of definition, or the power of definition, and then oppression comes? I can't tell you which order that kind of stuff comes in, but they are related, right? So looking at these shapes, which of these shapes signifies a male? So in your opinion, shape A, B, or C? Which one signifies a female? What's the truth about those shapes? They don't really signify anything in terms of gender. There's really nothing. Have you seen women with broad shoulders and a slim waist? I certainly have, right? Have you seen men with small shoulders and a big, you know, and big hips, right? I certainly have. Have you seen both men and women with no hips at all? You know, just kind of, right? So when we talk about this ability to define stuff, what we put on that, this is the Michael Kors purse kind of thing. How much is it worth? It's worth whatever value we associate with that, right? And so what the power definition says is we get to define. And who is this we? It typically is the dominant culture. The dominant culture defines things for other folks. So for an example, the power of definition. So the dominant culture sees itself in one kind of way and sees a subordinate culture in another kind of way. So they define what the other is. So the dominant culture sees itself as rational, and it sees the subordinate culture as irrational or emotional. The dominant culture sees itself as, let me use black to stay consistent. Objective. And the subordinate culture as subjective. The dominant culture sees itself as normal. sees itself as safe, and the subordinate culture as dangerous. Let me just take one more. Oh. Oh, no, I. Oh, no. Sorry. All right. So the dominant culture sees itself as rational. It sees the subordinate culture as emotional, sees itself as objective, sees the subordinate culture as subjective, meaning that they're constantly changing their mind. They're wishy-washy. It's not based on facts or anything like that. They see themselves as normal. They see the subordinate culture as abnormal. We see themselves as safe. They see the subordinate group as dangerous. They see themselves as crucial, and they see the subordinate group as parasitical, like they're trying to live off of all the stuff that we do, right? Now, are there some social categories that we could add to this that really flesh this out for us? Do you see any themes with social categories that are in our society that this kind of dichotomy applies to or could apply to? What is that? Rich, poor? All right, let's do my favorite. This is my favorite. Let's start with this idea of gender. What is the dominant, in terms of access to power, what is the dominant culture around gender? Male, right? So they have the power, males have the power of definition to define themselves, but also to define others. So what gets said about males? Males are rational. And what do they say about females? They're emotional. The same kind of idea, that objective, right? So men are normal and women are abnormal. We just don't understand them. We're from Mars and they're from Venus. Anyone ever heard of that book or heard reference to that, right? So in the 90s, that was a big book. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, talking about our differences and that kind of stuff. I find it interesting that it was supposed to be a marriage counseling book written by somebody who was divorced 3 times, but that's a whole nother conversation, right? So the dominant culture says that we are safe, and the other culture is that men are crucial. We are the breadwinners. We make all this stuff happen. And women just want to spend all our money. They are parasitical, right? So that's one way that plays out. If we did, so if we did race, right? So you can start to see how these things get said about people, right? If we, yes, I'll stop there. So the dominant culture has this thing, and it's called a transparency, because the dominant culture sees itself like this, but it doesn't really identify itself like that. It doesn't say these are the things we think about ourselves. They focus mostly on how people are different from them because they're normal, right? So the dominant culture is normal. So this transparency gets laid on everything, and much like I don't know if you guys used those in high school, where you had the kind of plastic sheets that teachers wrote on, and then it shined on the board. Yeah, okay. So it's kind of like those plastic sheets, right? So everything is overlaid on that, and so then this is how the dominant culture kind of relates or sets the framework for all the other folks. And so what ends up happening is this transparency gets laid onto the subordinate culture until they start to believe it themselves. And that is called internalized oppression, right? Internalized oppression. That's that transparency being applied on the subordinate group. I think that is interesting that, so for example, my wife, we went shopping for a dress, and we went to a number of different places for a dress, and she finally found a dress that she liked. And so we got the dress, and we went to a gathering, and there were other women that we knew, and one of the other women happened to pick the same dress. And my wife was like, I gotta go. I gotta go. And I was like, why? She was like, she's got on my dress. Two women can't be seen with the same dress on in the same place. And I'm like, where does that come from? What rule is that? Like, how do you come to that? Did anybody else had a similar experience, or is it, okay, cool. Where does that come from? That comes from that internalized oppression, right? That somehow I have to be so unique that I can't, blah, blah, blah. But at any rate, so this internalized oppression is that people start to believe that what the dominant culture says about them is true, right? I'll use women again as another example, because guys do it in a different kind of way. But when I taught in the middle school and the high school, the girls were so nasty to each other. I mean, the way things that they would say to each other, how they would treat each other, just absolutely horrific. But it was part of that internalized oppression. They believed this stuff. So you get stuff that's black. People will say that black on black crime is this idea of internalized oppression, that all the bad things that have been said about black people, they now believe, and so they act them out. I want to contradict this idea of black on black crime. Has anyone ever heard someone use that phrase, that there's black on black crime? Yep. Is there such thing as white on white crime?
Yes.
Yes, right? So that's a trick to try to get our primal brain engaged in ways that it shouldn't be engaged, right? So one of the things we also have to recognize is that if these dots are people, where's the most conflict going to happen between Petri dish A and Petri dish B? Where's the most conflict? If each of those dots represents people in A, right? Why? Yeah, proximity, right? So they have a lot, they're closer together, blah, blah, blah. So when we talk about this idea of black on black crime, what people are typically talking about is the proximity that these crimes have happened in. There's white on white crime too. But we don't like to talk about it like that because it doesn't trigger our primal brain to think a particular kind of way. So when you hear people talk about this idea of black on black crime, question them about that. You know, is that actually a proximity crime, or is it this innateness of black people to commit crimes? So I want you to question that. We'll talk about this idea of lower test scores. It was identified in the video. What might be one of those rationales for lower test scores? This idea of internalized oppression, right? This Pygmalion effect. And then people are better athletes, right? They feel like they're better athletes because they've been told that and they believe that, right? So here are some of the mechanisms of oppression. So we've talked a little bit about oppression. We've talked about the power of definition, with the dominant culture, how it defines itself and it gets to define the other culture. And this is, oh yeah, no. So this is another good one, right? So a nasty woman, right? Anybody, have you seen that hashtag kind of going around, right? So one candidate gets to define the other candidate as a nasty woman. I am sure that the other candidate said something just as flagrant or as offensive to the other candidate as what they said, but it didn't become a hashtag. Why? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure that she said something that was just as offensive as what he said, but hers had become a hashtag. And why is that? power definition. He's part of the dominant group, right? So he gets to define what women are. And the funny thing is, it is not so much that he's doing it, because I'm sure he did not physically set up a hashtag, right? But there are people who follow this dominant culture model, and so then they created the hashtag and all this kind of stuff. And then and here's an interesting response to that. So it was meant as a derogatory statement, yes? But what did women then do? Have you noticed that in social media? What did they ended up doing with that? They empowered it. They spun it around and said, yes, I am a nasty woman. Nasty women are the only ones who've changed the world. I mean, they really tried to do that. The problem is that typically the subordinate culture can do that, and it's the same reason why you'll hear kids use the N-word to each other, right? Trying to take an ugly word and give it and reframe it, because the power of definition said that this is what this word means and this is how you're supposed to feel, but they said we're going to turn it around. The only problem with that is typically subordinate cultures don't have enough influence to actually change that definition for the dominant culture. So they can do it for themselves, and yeah, I'm a parasite. I live off of my, they can try to turn these things around within their own culture, but it typically doesn't bleed into transforming the dominant culture, because the dominant culture only wants to reinforce itself, right? So there's that. So we have the mechanisms of oppression. So the first is power of definition, which is what we've talked about, this idea of ideology and passivity. So ideology is all that mindset stuff that sets the stage. And the thing about this ideology is that it gets so ingrained either as a transparency or in internalized oppression that we actually don't feel like we can change it. And that's that acquiescence, not feeling like we can change these things that we've made, is the first tool of oppression. We can always make a difference, and we can always change, right? The other thing is containment, both physical and psychological. So I'd like to tell the story about Beauty and the Beast. I won't even draw. I was going to try to draw it. But what's the story of Beauty and the Beast? And we've probably talked about this before. What's the story of Beauty and the Beast? Beauty.
Pretty self-explanatory.
It's self-explanatory. No, please explain.
Beautiful woman who comes to fall in love with a physically non-attractive.
Okay, so so beautiful woman falls in love with a physically non-attractive guy, but look, there's a whole bunch of story before we get to that part. So what happened at the beginning? Once upon a time,
there's a woman that came to this, which Alex and needed something, but he turned her away and she said at first, I'm going to turn him into a beast.
Yep. So she turned him into a beast. Yes, your hand was up.
I want to say, the father of the girl had made a deal with the beast and then went back on it, so that he owed her something. It's like, open your daughter, so she was kind of in captivity.
Okay. So yeah, so first the witch turned the prince on the outside what he was like on the inside, right? So she said, we're gonna make you look outside the way you are on the inside. And then there was a deal struck and with the father, and so he held the father captive and he exchanged the father for the girl, right? So now he has the girl in the castle. And once he has her in the castle, how does he treat her?
Not well in the beginning.
Not well, right? You can go here, you can't go there. Eat this, wear that. Right? Until, does anyone know what Stockholm Syndrome is? Can somebody, what is Stockholm Syndrome?
Where a prisoner begins to love their captor.
When the prisoner begins to love their captor, and that happened mostly during, I think that it was identified as something that happened during World War II, right? Where people would fall in love with the people who had captured them. And why might that happen to a prisoner? Yeah. So the basic needs are being met by that captor, even though I'm in captivity, right? So the Stockholm syndrome. So when we talk about this idea of containment, we're talking about this idea of Beauty and the Beast, right? So I did a lot of work with domestic violence, and one of the things that we ended up talking about was the cycle that's in this particular Disney movie. And actually, when I found out, it really shocked me. I was like, ah! So it's not something I came to on my own, but the story actually is a domestic violence story. Beauty and the Beast is a story about domestic violence. And that we've kind of dressed up to be this other stuff, which is one of the many problems with Disney, but we'll continue on. But this idea of physical containment. So if I can lock you into a particular area, or if I can keep you maintained by the use of power, then I can get certain types of behavior from you. And psychologically, if I can get you to think a particular kind of way, then I can get certain kinds of results from you and limit your access to power. And then lastly, this idea of isolation. And there's two forms that isolation kind of takes. One is making us too busy to be those good Samaritans, right? Why is that story of the Good Samaritan an important story? Yes.
Teaches one of God's most essential lessons, love thy neighbor.
Love. So it's an idea of love thy neighbor, and what else? What's that?
Stopping what you're doing.
Yeah, stopping what you're doing to be able to help somebody else. So sometimes when we see people in trouble, what's our first excuse for not helping? I got too much to do. I can't. I just, I got to get to this appointment. I got to blah, 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 blah. And so busyness is one of those things. The other thing about busyness is that there are, if I keep people running after, okay, so I'll let you in on my life. Here's a little light on my life. So my wife and I are, we live off of one income, which is my income. So what that means for us is that we do not have ski-doos. We don't have ski-doos. What that also means for us is that all of our cars are paid for in cash, and they're all, let me see, we have two. So yeah, so they're all more than 12 years old. But they're paid for in cash, right? It also means that our big dates, 5 Guys. Anybody go to 5 Guys?
I always hear people talk about it.
Yeah, it's great burgers and wonderful fries, right? Which means we don't do a whole lot of big stuff because we're trying not to be too busy to raise our daughter. Because sometimes, you're working two or three jobs between two adults to live one life. Somebody else has got to do the important work, right? And so we try not to be too busy. And also this idea of distance. I think it's always interesting that isolation is a tool of oppression. And so if I can keep people either physically away from each other or psychologically away from each other, then I'm keeping people away from power, right? I'm dividing and I'm conquering. So if I see kids who are acting up at a store and I'm not trying to help the parent because I don't see them as my kids, then oppression is working. If I see people who need help and I say that they're, I don't know them, so how can I help them? then oppression is working, right? So when that busyness and that distance happens. And so here are some of the pillars of oppression. And what is oppression supporting? And I'll go through this really quick. So the first pillar of oppression, and then we'll talk about what it's supporting, is this idea of predatory capitalism. Predatory capitalism. I am not I'm not anti-capitalism, but I am anti-predatory capitalism. And this is where we force people to buy things that they don't need or can't afford or aren't beneficial to them. And then there's this idea of bureaucracy. And what is a bureaucracy? Yes.
Established system of dividing up labor.
Okay, so it is an established system for dividing up all sorts of things like labor or other resources, right? The difference between, and these are people who are non-elected to do so. So they make up these processes based on their own set of rules, right? So bureaucracy. This idea of the fear of war and violence, the fear of that is a pillar of oppression. This idea of the welfare state is a pillar of oppression. What does the welfare state or the welfare mindset suggest in terms of being a pillar of oppression? What does that mean, the welfare state? Okay. So the welfare state basically says, I am going to create a bureaucracy where you need me. And when people are in need of someone else for their sustenance, they are beholden to that either entity or that person, right? So in the story of Beauty and the Beast, she was beholden to the beast for what?
They never say it.
Did he feed her?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did he clothe her? Yep. Did he make sure she had books because she liked books? Yeah, he did all of these things for her, even though he had her contained, right? So the welfare state keeps people beholden to the state. And so at some point she falls in love because she needs him for everyday things. And then there's this idea of genocide and poor health. That is a pillar of oppression. So if we keep people in poor health, then genocide just becomes a natural part of that, right? And genocide is what? Mass killings of people, right? Flint, Michigan. You guys heard the stories of Flint, Michigan? Did they keep the people in poor health? Yes. What's the natural outcome of people having poor health? This idea of genocide. And but I don't. That's a pillar of oppression. I don't want to go too far down there. This idea of slavery and debt. There's a relationship between slavery and debt. We don't have shackles and chains on many people. There are some situations where that does happen. But for the most part, if we can keep people in debt, it is very similar to a form of or type of slavery. And then lastly is this, and this is particularly for us. I don't use this last pillar when I'm doing school stuff or secular stuff, but this idea of spiritual vacuum. When there's a spiritual vacuum, that can become a pillar of oppression. And so what are all these pillars keeping up? They are keeping up this idea of colonialism, imperialism, nationalism, and patriotism. And what is colonialism? What is that? What does that mean? Yeah, go ahead.
Basically, a smaller area of people is subject to the authority of a larger group of people.
Yeah. So, and I like using and anyone else have another definition for colonialism? Another way to think about that is that a king sends out their people to take over that land, right? So a king sends people. So the king actually has physical people there, That's colonialism. What is imperialism? How's that differ? Yes.
That's directly conquering the land.
Actually, directly conquering the land and doing one other thing. Go ahead.
I would say just using it for its resources more so than actually like instituting itself within people.
Yeah, so it is conquering the land and instituting government there, but not having people there. So I use the people who are native to that land as an extension of my empire, right? But I don't have bases there. I don't have forts there. I don't have staff there. But I use those people who now are indoctrinated in my empire to do these things. And then nationalism, what is that? Anybody ever heard nationalism? Yeah. Okay. What's national? Go ahead.
Sense of affiliation with a state or a state that like, I would say like you belong to it, or that you belong to it.
Yeah. Right? So the need of separating nation states. So one of the things that we're having a problem with right now is the Dakota Access Pipeline, right? And why are we having conflict at the Dakota Access Pipeline? What are one of the many issues there? It goes through reservations, right? So entities that are in conflict with each other. The United States of America, the Sioux Nation, and what's the third entity? It's the company, right? And so the Sioux Nation doesn't necessarily see themselves having limited boundaries, but the United States certainly sees them as having these limited boundaries. And the company also sees that they need to comply with the US's boundary markers, right? So so that nation state thing. Nationalism, and then patriotism is what?
National pride.
National pride. I love my country. Blah blah blah. What can be the pitfall of patriotism? Blindness, right? I mean, you fall in love with someone so much that you don't see the fact that they're a beast, right? Or that they have a booger in their nose. Right? So those are the pillars of oppression, and this is kind of what those pillars are holding up. Any thoughts, comments, observations about this? Yes.
Would there be any positive internalized, like I'd say probably called internalized oppression, but like could there be any positive result from internalizing this perception that you hold of yourself? Like say like one thinks they're a good athlete, so that way they can perform in a good way, but once they start doing that, like others are better than you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What do we call that? We call it confidence. We also refer to it as self-esteem, right? So that belief. And the difference between this is around this idea of definition. Who gets to define that, right? So when I and my group define something, that's different than when someone else defines it for me, right? So so yeah, no, there can be positive Pygmalion effects, right? So you tell your students that you're great segue. This is one of the lies that is very detrimental and hurtful to kids. And I'm gonna write this on the board. And this is a lie. And you tell me why it's a lie. Have you heard that? Have you adults tell kids this? Why is this a lie? And I'm addressing it as a lie as opposed to something else. And you'll see why in just a second. Why is this a lie? Yes. It's not necessarily true. Why?
Well, if you want, like, it says I want to be a singer when I grow up, but then people find out they're not going to be a singer when they grow up. It's just the people have unique talents and abilities and different options more. Available to them.
The people have different talents and abilities and should have different options to go after those, right? Yeah, no, so you can't be. It's so funny, you know, little kids will say, well, I want to be in the NBA. And I'm not about smashing kids' dreams. So I'm like, you know, whatever, you want to, you know. But, you know, you start getting in middle school and you say you want to be in the NBA and you can't do a sit-up. I got to start telling you the truth about some stuff, right? So if you want to be in the NBA, you got to start doing some sit-ups. You got to do some push-ups. You got to be able to run. Maybe you should know how to play basketball. Right? Now we have, you know, those people who are just gifted at these things that just, you know, they can just pick up a thing and just be good at it. But that's not the majority of us, right? And so one of the things that we have to stop telling kids is, because the other question is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Anybody ever heard that question? Right? So I just turned 46 and I don't have an answer to that question. What do I want to be when I grow up? But I do know what kind of person I want to be, right? So, like I said before, I've had jobs that didn't exist when I was a kid, when I was younger, right? That I couldn't prepare for that, but I can only prepare for them because of the kind of person I was. So you can be anything you want to be is a great thing to say, but the truth of the matter is that people can be what they're what? Willing to work for, right? So if you're willing to work for being a basketball player, you can do that. Doesn't guarantee anything, right? You know, we're not a meritocracy-based society. Just like we demonstrated with that race. Just because you're the fastest doesn't mean you're the closest. Just because you're blah blah blah. So so that's something that's important. The other thing I wanted to just talk about real briefly is this idea of affirmative action in Title IX. And affirmative action is an attempt to create equity. And in itself, equity is not what? It's not fair, right? But we'll talk about more why affirmative action kind of has picked itself up. And Title IX, is anyone familiar with Title IX? Yep, what is Title IX?
It's within college sports that states men and women need to be represented equally.
Yep. So in 1979, Title IX was established for women's sports, but it is translated beyond just women's sports and into everyday college activities for women, that they have equal and open access to all the goods, job services, and money that their male counterparts do. So, so Title IX is important. We'll talk about affirmative action on Wednesday. These are the notes. If you would be so kind, in your, if you can answer the questions from White Like Me, just answer those questions and send those in an email to me. They'll be super. Don't forget on Sunday we have our CLE, at the Holy Christian Church, 125 Stevens Street. And that's our community learning event, our religious community learning event on Sunday. Yes.
You want that email or you want to post it on Moodle?
I don't think I put anything on Moodle for you to post it on. Oh, I did.
Different due date.
Okay, good. Okay, so post it in Moodle. Good. All right, thank you so much. I will see you guys on Wednesday. So, Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Just get the rest of those hours with what the other folks are doing.
Okay.
And we'll just chalk it up.
Okay.
As we'll just write it down.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is the name of the church or anything, is that one little?
I think it is, yeah. Let me just go quick.
For that church?
Yeah. It's, there should only be two. One is in Mankato and the other one is in West St. Paul.
Do you know what time it's at?
Yep, at 10 o'clock. Yep, at 10 o'clock.
And then you said it's called the.
The Holy Christian Church. It's in West St. Paul.
Then the assignment for this is the which one is it?
It's a faith-based paper.
Okay.
Should I grab it? Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So I have one more in there still.
Carpooling then?
Yeah, okay, yeah, and we'll divide that up on Wednesday, the carpool. All right.
Hi.
Hey, what's going on? What's going on?
I'm Peter. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
We
In
met
the other
before.
classroom.
Yeah, in the other classroom.
Yep, right after my
Physics.
class.
Yeah, right
the
after
physics.
I had physics.
Yeah.
And I have a question. So I'm not an education major, but me and one of my physics buddies were wondering if we could take. This is educational equity.
Yeah.
We're wondering if we could take this.
Yep, you
Is that-
can. Yep. So right now, what the process is there are 30 seats.
Okay.
And they haven't opened up registration
Sure.
yet. So I don't know how many
Right,
education.
right.
So I think they're supposed to open that up on the 11th.
Okay.
So right after that,
Okay.
I'll know. And
Yeah.
can, certainly if there's room.
If there's room that I can sneak in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
That'd be
you
awesome.
and your buddy, that'd be super.
All right, that'd be great. And then one question, because it is a Z tag, which requires a lot of.
Yep.
How does that work in J term?
Yep, so it works the same.
Okay.
It just means, so the way that the class is situated is that you have class in the morning. You're supposed to do any Z-tag activities
Stuff
in that
in the afternoon.
So,
And would like volunteering at like Uni Gospel Mission or something?
that would be
count as
excellent.
something?
That
Okay.
would be excellent.
I was thinking about doing something like that.
Yep, so, and if you can set that up now.
Yeah, that's what I
that
was
would be-
thinking.
Yep, that would
'Cause-
be wonderful.
Could I actually get it going now and then for the next couple months, do a couple hours a week instead of like a couple hours a day and then like build up to like
Yeah.
start volunteering now
Yeah,
and
no,
then
so since we had this conversation, yes.
okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So that will work.
Well, I will see you on the 11th if
All right.
there are any open spots.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
And like I said, on the 11th, we should know who's registered, and then
Okay.
and if we have to do a second section, we can also talk about doing that
Right.
as well if we have too
Okay.
many folks. But
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
yeah, encourage as many people as you can
Yeah, definitely.
to sign up.
Definitely.
So,
Okay.
all right.
Well, thank you so much. I
Not a
appreciate
problem.
that.
Not a problem, man. And your name again is?
I'm Peter.
Peter. Okay,
Thank
Peter.
you so much.
All righty.